Thank you for joining us on WQPH 89.3 FM Shirley Fitchburg, Queen of Perpetual Help, and another edition of Local Matters. On this week's broadcast, we bring you another episode from Faith Alive. This is a show that focused on Pope Leo's trip to Cameroon, and we aired the premiere episode a few weeks ago. And this is a continuation of that episode about Pope Leo's trip and much more. And following that, we have musician Samuel Matt, who is bringing a few songs available on YouTube. The album is called Yesterday's Gone. Visit Samuel Matt on YouTube to listen to his music.
During the Wednesday Papal General Audience of April 29, 2026, the Holy Father, Pope Leo, took time to reflect on what his recent apostolic visit trip meant to him personally. He mentioned the opportunities it afforded him and the riches it brought to his personal faith and witness. In our previous episode, we chronicled Pope Leo's journey to Africa, focusing especially on his journey to Cameroon and what it meant for the Cameroonian people and the Cameroonian church. In this follow-up episode, we take up the task of unpacking the Holy Father's message as he shares what this experience meant for him. I am your host, Father Clement Patrick Wines, a priest of the Archdiocese of Bamenda in Cameroon, Central West Africa. Pope Leo XIV began his general audience by revealing that from the very beginning of his pontificate, he had considered the thought about a journey to Africa. He thanked the Lord for granting him the opportunity. He also expressed gratitude to the bishops and civil authorities who welcomed him and helped organize the visit. Regarding the countries he visited, let us begin, for example, from the first country, which was Algeria. About Algeria, the Pope has this to say: "Providence will have it that the first stop should be in the very country where the sites of Augustine are found, namely Algeria. First, I found myself, on the one hand, revisiting the roots of my spiritual identity, and on the other, crossing and strengthening bridges that are very important for the world and the church today. The bridge with the very fruitful age of the fathers of the church, the bridge with the Islamic world, and the bridge with the African continent." This highlights, first of all, a moment of spiritual renewal for the Pope, who is an Augustinian to the core. How can we forget the very first words with which he greeted the whole world on the evening of his election, saying, "I am a son of St. Augustine, who said, 'For you I am a bishop, and with you I am a Christian.'" This positions Leo as not just on the giving end, but also on the receiving end of this apostolic journey. It is a kind of experience that religious always have when they visit the sites linked to their founders. Think of the Franciscans visiting Assisi, for example, or the Jesuits visiting Manresa, or the Benedictines visiting Monte Cassino. There is a sense in which the lives and the charisms of their founders become palpable to them. So little wonder that the Pope could not hide his deep emotions as he celebrated Mass and planted an olive tree near the ancient ruins of Hippo, present-day Annaba. What strikes me deeply here is that the Pope did not arrive Algeria merely as a teacher. He arrived also as a learner. There is something profoundly important about that posture, and it speaks to a truth that education has long wrestled with. That genuine formation never flows in one direction only. The best educators know that they are shaped by the very environments and people they encounter. Pope Leo, standing in the ruins of Hippo, was not a performative gesture. He was being formed again by a place, by a memory, by a tradition that preceded him and will outlast him. This is what we might call a pedagogy of presence, the willingness to let a place speak, to let history teach, to let silence carry its own weight and its own authority. For those of us who believe in the dignity and irreplaceable contribution of every voice, every tradition, every background, there is a lesson here that goes beyond theology. The church, like any truly inclusive community, grows richer not by absorbing difference into uniformity, but by allowing each encounter to expand what it knows of God. Leo in Hippo was not simply remembering Augustine, he was being reminded that no one, not even a pope, arrives at the fullness of truth alone. But beyond this personal dimension of Pope Leo's spiritual mentor, however, is a question of building bridges. The first bridge mentioned by the pontiff is that between the very fruitful age of the fathers of the church and the church of today. The context of this is the fact that though Algeria and most of North Africa is primarily Muslim today, the first 7 centuries saw the flourishing of Christianity in these countries till the Islamic invasion of the 7th century. This was particularly so because the countries formed part of the ancient Roman Empire in which Christianity was a state religion. Several dioceses, theological schools, and catechetical developments emerged during this period. With the Islamic invasion, indigenous Christianity began to disappear. Christianity was reintroduced to these parts of Africa during the period of the French colonization. To this day, however, the Christians remain a very slim minority in Algeria and its environs. By building the bridge between the age of the fathers of the church and the church of today, Leo is honoring that era of the church and the heritage it bequeathed to Christianity as a whole. He mentioned that though small, the Christian population of Algeria is precious and significant. Regarding the bridge to the Islamic world, one can discern that this is an important theme for Leo's pontificate, because we will recall his visit to Lebanon and to Turkey. Pope Leo highlights that profound theological differences exist between Christians and Muslims. However, mutual dialogue is still to be fostered for the sake of peaceful coexistence and reducing fear between Muslims and Christians. Common values can be fostered together so that religious persecutions by radicalisms may be dealt with. Finally, Leo mentions a third bridge being that of the First World and the African continent. Of course, it's no news that the demographics of the church today are becoming less and less Eurocentric and are moving over to the global south. The next 3 countries which the Pope visited were predominantly Christian in population. So he found himself immersed in an atmosphere of celebration of the faith and a warm welcome. Regarding, for example, his visit to Cameroon, Pope Leo had this to say: "The visit to Cameroon allowed me to reinforce the call to work together for reconciliation and for peace. For that country too, unfortunately, marked by tensions and violence, I am glad to have traveled to Bamenda in the Anglophone region, where I encouraged people to work together for peace. Cameroon is known as Africa in miniature because of the variety and richness of its natural environment and its resources. But we can also interpret this to mean that the great needs of the entire continent are found in Cameroon. The need for a fair distribution of wealth, the need to provide space for the young, overcoming endemic corruption, that of promoting integral and sustainable development, countering the various forms of neocolonialism with far-sighted international cooperation." End of quote. Of course, this analysis honestly cuts deep into the reality of our country, Cameroon. So the Pope interprets Africa in miniature to mean that Cameroon bears both the blessings and the wounds of the entire continent. And so it is his wish that a fruitful course of action and future choices for the entire continent will also begin to be exemplified in this very land. The third leg of the trip was in Angola, a country south of the equator with centuries long of Christian tradition, linked, of course, to the Portuguese colonization. The church and the Christian faith came to Angola around 1483 to 1491 in the late 15th century. This was born from the fusion of Portuguese trade and colonial expansion with Catholic missionary activity. Centered on Roman Catholicism under the Padroado Real system, the Jesuit missionaries and later the Spiritans played a key role in converting local leaders such as in the Congo Kingdom, often using it to establish political alliances. Like many African countries, after achieving independence, Angola went through a troubled period, which in its case was marked by a long and bloody civil war. In the crucible of this history, God has guided and purified the church, increasingly converting her in the service of the gospel, human promotion, reconciliation, and peace. A free church for a free people. And we'll remark that this was also the content of the apostolic visit of Pope Benedict XVI to Angola in 2009. Also, the same time he came to Cameroon. Pope Leo observed about Angola that in the sanctuary of Maria Musima, which means Mother of the Heart, I felt the beating heart of the Angolan people. And in the various meetings, I rejoiced to see so many men and women religious of every age, a prophecy of the kingdom of heaven in the midst of their people. I saw catechists who dedicate themselves to the good of the community. I saw the faces of elderly people, weathered by toil and suffering, yet radiant with the joy of the gospel. I saw women and men dancing to the rhythm of songs of praise to the risen Lord, the foundation of a hope that withstands the disappointments caused by ideologies and the empty promises of the faithful, of the powerful. It is hoped that the deeper commitment on the part of the church to a courageous proclamation of the Word of God will purify the consciences of nations so that the dignity and the rights of all will be respected. Now, the final country to be visited during this apostolic visit was Equatorial Guinea. This country is a highly authoritarian, one-party state ruled by President Teodoro Obiang Nguema since 1979, resulting in near zero political competition. While 90% of citizens are nominally Christian, mostly Roman Catholic, of course, the government strictly controls religious activity, occasionally shutting down evangelical churches and forcing religious groups to register. President Obiang is the world's longest serving leader. The country is a consolidated authoritarian regime with no effective separation of power. Political rights and civil liberties are extremely restricted, especially freedom of expression, which is heavily suppressed. So, this is the context in which Pope Leo visited Equatorial Guinea. And so, as he recounts his experience, he was particularly marked by what had happened in the prison of Bata. The prisoners sang at the top of their voices a song of thanksgiving to God and to the Pope, asking him to pray for their sins and for their freedom. And the Pope recounts that I had never ever seen anything like it. And they prayed the Our Father with me in the pouring rain, a genuine sign of the kingdom of God. The Pope went on to meet the young people in the stadium in Bata, still in the rain. Of course, with a very huge crowd that turned out to see him there. And his visit culminated with the celebration of the Holy Eucharist the next day. And of course, this was the last Mass he celebrated to close not just his visit to Equatorial Guinea, but the entire apostolic trip itself, thanking God for its successes and for what it had afforded him and it had afforded the people. So when taken together, these four countries offer us something more than a travelogue of the African church. They offer a living curriculum. Algeria teaches that identity is deepened, not diminished, when it is brought into an honest encounter with difference. Cameroon teaches that peace is not the absence of tension, but the daily choice to remain at the table, even when the table is contested. Angola teaches that a community that has passed through fire does not merely survive, it discovers a quality of joy and praise that comfortable faith rarely finds. And Equatorial Guinea teaches, perhaps the hardest lesson of all, that the gospel is most luminous precisely where human structures have grown most dark. Each country brought its own voice, its own wound, but its own gift. What the Pope received and what we are called to receive through his witness is the understanding that the church is not a single story told in one language by one kind of people. It is a chorus. Its richness lies not in the blending of all voices into sameness, but in the willingness to let each voice be heard in its own register. That is not merely good theology, it is the only kind of community worth building. As he himself concluded his reflection at the general audience, he highlighted that it had been a chance for the African people to make their voices heard, to express the joy of being God's people and the hope for a better future, of the dignity for each and every one. He ended by thanking the Lord for what this visit had given him, an immeasurable treasure, he said, to his heart and his ministry. Still, there is a lot to unpack regarding the context and the message of Pope Leo's visit to Africa. As the curtains have now fallen silent, the microphones have grown silent, the cameras turned off, the Pope back in the Vatican, and life resumes normalcy, the huge question is, what next? Any right-thinking person will agree that this heavy question does not lend itself to easy answers. The president of the National Episcopal Conference of Cameroon and the Archbishop of Bamenda, Archbishop Andrew Kia, observed in an interview after the Pope's visit that when the Pope comes to a place, it is an event. But really, that event is not as important as the aftermath of the event. The Pope has given speeches and messages. We have all clapped. We are all happy. Now, what next? That question is very important for all of us. I think that in the whole country, we have to sit down to digest all of those messages. And secondly, we have to see what it takes to implement them. We have to really set up committees to study and implement these words of the Pope and see how this can become a reality. With these words, the Archbishop underscores the task that lies ahead, which involves everyone taking up their individual responsibilities at various levels with the collective vision drawn from the Pope's messages so that each can make his contribution for a better future. As a priest, I've been personally challenged by the courageous and prophetic witness of the Pope to our continent, because only the bold proclamation of the Word of God can illuminate our consciences so that the graces which flow from the sacraments will be able to bring about the conversion of hearts without which no true change is ever possible. You see, it takes fortitude to believe in the face of disaster, but even more so, to proclaim a word of life into a valley of dry bones with the flickering hope that dry bones can live again. So with this, we bring our reflections on Pope Leo's apostolic visit to Africa to a close. In our next episode, we will make an exciting discovery of the life and witness of the first Cameroonian on the path to sainthood, Venerable Baba Simon Peke. Thank you for listening to this episode of our podcast. See you in the next episode, and God bless you.
And now music from local musician Samuel Matt. The first selection is Girl of the Northern Star, and the second is called Goodyear, both off his Yesterday's Gone album.
Seduction I promise you know exactly who you are. It isn't far. There is love, my girl, the northern star. There will be love. She sees beyond the darkness and points out towards the sky. Dances with the angels and she goes by. Children, I was one. Take me back to that vibrance of youth. Let me know nothing else. Is this supposed to be a turning point, or is it God's way of telling me slow down? Whatever direction I go, I always seem to come down. Broke the silence for a while. Those were good times, I mean it, I really do. I could have made it much easier, but I didn't think of it then. We would have noticed how beautiful it is to just be. And I remember that fateful day when we essentially gave ourselves away. I'm such a fool, I didn't notice myself. I should have listened to the voice in my head. Hey, how are you feeling today? I ask because I love you, I do. Even though it doesn't seem that way. Can my love take wing and fly, or will it plummet due to my device? I hope yours flies above the trees and never stops. And so I and I remember that fateful day when we essentially gave ourselves away. I'm such a fool, I didn't notice myself. I should have listened to the voice in my head. Will I I'm such a fool, I didn't notice myself. I should have listened to the voice in my head. And I remember that December day when we essentially gave ourselves away. I'm such a fool, I didn't notice myself. I should have listened to the voice in my head.
Thank you for listening to another edition of WQPH's Local Matters. We hope you enjoyed the broadcast and hope you have a blessed week.